Nia was 19 years old, yet her eyes often looked much older. She had lived through struggles that most people her age could not imagine. Growing up as an orphan in a small town was never easy. She had no mother to comfort her when she was sad, and no father to protect her when she was weak. Instead, she carried her own burdens on her thin shoulders. She moved from place to place, sometimes sleeping in the homes of kind neighbors, sometimes alone in corners that felt empty and cold. Life had hardened her, but deep inside she still carried a hope that one day she would belong somewhere. Nia's days were long and quiet. She worked small jobs, sweeping, cooking, or washing clothes for others. People in the town often pitied her, but pity never gave her food. Some whispered that she was cursed, some ignored her, and others looked at her with indifference. She learned to keep her head down, to walk quietly, and to survive. Still, her heart longed for stability, for someone to call family, for a place she could call home. It was during this time of quiet struggle that Seko came into her life. Seko was 54 years old, a man of wealth and influence in the town. He was known by many and respected by most, though others feared him. He had land, businesses, and people who worked under his name. Wherever he went, people stepped aside. He was not cruel, but his presence was strong, and he carried himself with authority. Seko noticed Nia one day as she worked outside a shop, scrubbing the floor with tired hands. Her dress was simple and worn, her hair tied back with no care for beauty, yet there was something about her that caught his eye. She was young, but her expression was filled with quiet strength. He learned from others that she was an orphan with no family and no one to guide her. For days Seko thought about her. Unlike the women he usually saw, Nia did not ask for his attention or seek his wealth. She lived simply, but there was a dignity in her silence. Then one evening, Seko spoke to her directly. He asked about her life, her struggles, and her dreams. Nia answered softly, unsure why a man like him would care to listen. After some time, Seko made an unexpected offer. He asked her to marry him. The word shocked Nia. Marriage? She looked at him, unable to speak at first. He was older, much older than her, and their worlds were so different. The idea seemed strange, and yet in his voice there was no mockery. He spoke plainly, saying he would give her a home, protection, and a life where she would no longer have to beg or struggle alone. The town was not quiet about this news. When people heard that Seko wanted to marry a 19-year-old orphan, whispers filled the air. Some laughed at the idea, some judged harshly, saying Nia was foolish, and others said Seko only wanted to show his power. But none of their voices reached as deeply as the one inside Nia's heart. Nia lay awake at night, thinking. She thought of her years of loneliness, of hunger, of walking barefoot on cold ground. She thought of the looks people gave her, always seeing her as a burden or an outsider. She thought of her fear of growing older with no one by her side. And then she thought of Seko's offer. He was older, yes. His life was different, yes. But he was also offering her something she had never truly had: security, a place to belong, and perhaps even respect. For the first time, someone wanted her, not as a servant or a worker but as a wife. With a mixture of fear and hope, Nia made her choice. She agreed. The wedding was simple but full of attention. People gathered, not out of joy but out of curiosity. Some smirked, whispering about the strange union, while others watched with surprise. Nia stood quietly, her dress plain but clean, her eyes lowered. She did not feel like a bride in a fairy tale. She felt like a girl stepping into an unknown future, one she could not yet understand. Seko stood beside her, tall and commanding. He spoke his vows clearly, his voice strong, while Nia's voice trembled softly. When the ceremony ended, some clapped politely, others shook their heads, and a few walked away laughing. But Nia did not look at them. She only focused on the fact that now she was no longer alone. That night, as Nia entered Seko's large house, she felt both small and overwhelmed. The rooms were wide, the furniture heavy, the walls decorated with things she had never owned. She walked carefully, her hands trembling, unsure if she truly belonged there. Seko noticed her nervousness and spoke gently, telling her she was welcome, that this was now her home too. Nia sat on the edge of the bed that night, looking out the window at the dark sky. She thought of the whispers in town, of the laughs, of the doubts. She wondered if she had made the right choice. Yet at the same time she felt a strange calm inside her. For the first time in years she had a roof that was hers, a place where she was not just a guest. Her heart carried both fear and hope. She did not know what the future would bring, but she knew one thing clearly: her life had changed forever. Life in Seko's home was nothing like what Nia had imagined on the day of their wedding. The house was large, filled with polished wood, decorated walls, and servants who moved quietly from room to room. She had a bed softer than anything she had ever slept on before, food on the table every day, and clothes that were far better than the worn dresses she once wore. On the outside, her life looked like it had improved greatly. People in town who once mocked her now greeted her with respect, and some even with envy. But deep inside, Nia carried a quiet emptiness. The walls of the house, though beautiful, often felt like they were closing in on her. The silence was heavy, and her heart longed for something more than comfort. It longed for companionship, for laughter, for someone who understood her soul. Seko, her husband, was kind in his own way. He never shouted at her, never treated her cruelly. Yet there was a distance between them that Nia could not ignore. Seko was old-fashioned, shaped by the traditions of his generation. He gave instructions rather than having conversations. He believed in order, in discipline, in routines. For him, Nia was a young wife who should be cared for and guided, but not truly listened to. Often he treated her more like a daughter than a partner. He would tell her when to eat, when to rest, when to join him in social gatherings. He bought her jewelry and fine clothes, but rarely asked what she liked or how she felt. To Seko he had given her everything she could need. But to Nia what she needed most was something she could not ask for, a sense of freedom and an equal voice. At night, when Seko fell asleep early, Nia would sit by the window of her room, looking out at the moon. The quiet of the night reminded her of her days as an orphan, when she would sit alone and dream of a different life. She thought of the laughter of girls her age, the excitement of youth, the sound of joy. But here in this house she felt too young and too old at the same time. She wanted to speak, to share her feelings, but fear held her back. She knew the town already whispered about her marriage. If she complained, people would mock her even more. They would say, she chose this life. She married for comfort, and now she is ungrateful. The thought of their judgment kept her silent. Still, Nia tried to be patient. She reminded herself of the hunger she once endured, of the nights she went to bed without food, of the times she begged for work just to survive. She told herself that this life, even with its loneliness, was better than her past. She chose to carry her sadness quietly, as though it were another burden she had to endure. Seko in his way did care for her. Sometimes he noticed her silence and asked, "Are you well, Nia?" She would smile gently and say, "Yes, I am fine," even though her heart was heavy. He believed her words because he wanted to. He never imagined that behind her calm face lived a storm of emotions she was too afraid to reveal. As weeks turned to months, Nia's days fell into a routine. She woke early, greeted the servants, ate breakfast, and performed small tasks in the house. Seko would go out to attend his businesses, leaving her alone for long hours. Sometimes women from the town visited her, but their conversations often revolved around gossip and judgment, not friendship. They admired her jewelry but secretly envied her position, and Nia could feel their insincerity. Loneliness began to press harder on her heart. She thought of what it meant to be young. Other girls her age were beginning their journeys, learning, exploring, and making choices freely. But her path felt decided already, like a cage she had willingly stepped into. She questioned herself quietly, had she chosen safety at the cost of happiness? One afternoon she wandered into the garden of Seko's house. The flowers were bright, the trees tall, and the air fresh. For a moment she felt alive again. She knelt to touch the soil, letting it slip between her fingers, and thought of her childhood. She remembered running barefoot in open fields, laughing despite her hardships, feeling free though she had nothing. Tears filled her eyes as she realized that in gaining a home, she had lost a part of her spirit. But Nia was not one to give up easily. She told herself that she had survived worse. She had survived hunger, loneliness, and judgment. She could survive this too. Patience became her shield. She chose to keep her feelings hidden, to smile when she felt like crying, to nod when she wished to protest. Her silence, however, grew heavier. Each day, it seemed to stretch like a shadow across her heart. She wished Seko could see her not only as someone to protect, but also as someone to share life with. She longed for a voice, for laughter, for a freedom she could not yet reach. And so, Nia lived between two worlds, the world of comfort and security, and the world of dreams and silent sorrow. She reminded herself again and again that she had made this choice, and choices had consequences. But in the stillness of the night, when no one could hear her, she whispered to herself, "One day I will find my true happiness." One evening, the house was quieter than usual. The air felt heavy as if something unseen lingered in the rooms. Nia walked through the halls, carrying a tray of tea, when she heard Seko coughing behind the door of his study. She paused, listening closely. The sound was not like an ordinary cough. It was deep, strained, and filled with weakness. Her heart tightened. Slowly she opened the door and stepped inside. Seko sat slouched in his chair, his hand pressed to his chest. His face, usually proud and strong, looked pale and tired. Papers lay scattered across his desk, forgotten. When he noticed Nia, he quickly straightened, trying to mask his weakness with a forced smile. "I am fine," he said, waving his hand as if it were nothing. But Nia had lived long enough with pain to recognize it when she saw it. At first, anger rose inside her heart. She wondered why he had kept this from her. Why had he not told her the truth? Was this why he had married her? Because he knew he would soon grow weak and wanted someone young to care for him? The thought stung her deeply. She felt betrayed, as though her hope for companionship and belonging had been built on a hidden reason. That night, Nia lay awake in her bed, unable to sleep. Her mind raced with questions. Had she been chosen only for her youth? Had Seko given her a home not out of love but out of need? The whispers of the town echoed in her memory. She married him for comfort and he married her for himself. Her chest grew heavy with the weight of doubt. But as the hours passed, another memory stirred within her. She remembered her own childhood, the way she had felt abandoned and unwanted. She remembered the nights she had cried silently, wondering why no one stayed beside her. And then she looked at Seko in her thoughts, not as the powerful man the town saw, but as a tired, aging soul who was now facing the fear of weakness and the shadow of death. In that moment, her anger softened. She realized that pain was not a stranger to either of them. She had lived it as a child and now he was living it in his later years. He had not confessed his weakness because, perhaps like her, he feared being left behind. The next morning when Seko tried to rise from bed, his strength failed him. He leaned on the wall, his face tight with effort. Nia stepped forward quietly and held his arm. At first he resisted, pride flashing in his eyes. But when his legs trembled, he allowed her support. She guided him back to the chair, her hand steady though her heart was uncertain. From that day onward, Nia's role began to change. She was no longer simply a young wife living in the shadows of his authority. She became his helper, his caretaker, his companion in weakness. She brought him meals, sat with him when his cough grew worse, and read to him when his eyes could no longer focus on the words. At first it felt strange to her. She had dreamed of being loved, of sharing laughter and joy, not of caring for an ill husband. But slowly something in her heart shifted. Each time she saw him lean back with relief after she helped him, or when she caught the soft gratitude in his tired eyes, she began to see him differently. He was no longer just an older man who had married her. He was a human being, fragile and in need, just as she had once been. One evening, as she placed a blanket over him while he slept, Nia felt a quiet strength inside her. She thought of the many people who had walked away from her when she was weak. She remembered the loneliness of being ignored, the pain of being abandoned. She whispered softly, though he could not hear, "I will not leave you. Not like others left me." In caring for Seko, Nia began to heal a part of herself. She had always longed for someone to love her, but now she discovered the power of giving love. She learned that compassion was not only about receiving, it was also about offering warmth to someone who needed it most. Seko too changed in those days. His proud voice softened, his eyes became gentler. He no longer spoke to Nia only as a guide or guardian. Instead, he began to thank her, to listen when she spoke, to hold her hand when fear gripped him in the night. In his weakness, he discovered her strength. And in his gratitude, she found the respect she had long craved. The town, which once whispered about their strange marriage, began to see something different. People noticed how Nia walked beside Seko, steady and calm. They saw her devotion, her patience, her quiet dignity. Some who had mocked her now spoke of her with admiration. They said, "She is more than a wife. She is his strength." Still, life was not easy. There were nights when Nia cried alone, overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility. She was still young, still full of dreams, and sometimes she wondered what her life could have been. But when she saw Seko smile faintly, when she heard him whisper "thank you" with a weak voice, she felt that her choice carried meaning. Their bond deepened not with laughter and excitement, but with silence, patience and care. In his weakness she discovered her own resilience. In his gratitude she discovered her own worth. What began as a marriage of uncertainty slowly turned into a story of unexpected companionship. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing became clear to Nia: she was no longer the lonely orphan searching for a place to belong. She had become a source of comfort, of strength, and of love that was not born out of age or wealth, but out of shared humanity. Time moved slowly, yet with each day that passed, something new blossomed between Nia and Seko. Their relationship, which had once been heavy with silence and distance, began to shift like the change of seasons. Seko no longer looked at Nia as a helpless girl who needed guidance. Instead, he began to see her as a woman, strong, patient, and wise beyond her years. In the mornings when Seko struggled to rise, it was Nia who helped him. She no longer carried bitterness in her actions. She moved with quiet strength, her hands steady, her heart calm. And when Seko looked at her, he saw not only her youth but the depth of her soul. She gave him something more valuable than wealth or medicine. She gave him the will to live each day with dignity. As his health grew weaker, Seko often spent evenings in his chair, gazing out of the window. Nia would sit beside him, listening to the stories of his youth. He told her of the days when he was strong and full of dreams, when he worked hard to build his wealth, when he traveled to far towns and met many people. His voice carried both pride and regret, but Nia never interrupted. She listened with care, her eyes soft, her presence steady. Sometimes he spoke of mistakes he had made. He admitted that his pride had pushed people away, that his hunger for respect had left little room for love. "I thought strength was never showing weakness," he confessed one evening, his eyes lowered. "But now, with you, I see that true strength is in kindness, in patience, in loyalty." Nia's heart softened each time she heard these words. She had once believed that her life had been trapped, that her youth had been taken away by marrying him. But as she listened to him open his heart, she began to understand that she was also receiving something rare, a chance to grow in wisdom, a chance to learn the depth of human love. The people in town, who once mocked her for marrying Seko, began to notice the change too. At first they had whispered cruel words. They had laughed at her choice, saying she had given up her youth for comfort. But now they saw something different. They saw the way Nia walked beside Seko, steady and proud. They saw her loyalty, her patience, her gentle strength. In the market, women who once looked down on her began to greet her with respect. Men who once mocked her choice now spoke of her dignity. Children whispered her name with admiration, saying, "That is Nia, the woman who stood by her husband even when others doubted her." Slowly, the air of judgment around her faded, replaced with quiet admiration. Nia herself began to feel the change within. She was no longer the frightened orphan who searched for belonging. She had become a woman shaped by hardship and patience, by love and responsibility. She had learned to carry silence with dignity, to answer cruelty with kindness, to turn weakness into strength. She discovered courage in the moments when Seko leaned on her arm. She discovered wisdom in the stories he told. She discovered patience in the long nights when his cough kept him awake. Each challenge, each quiet struggle, became a lesson that shaped her into someone she had never imagined she could become. Seko too found peace in her love. He no longer feared the days ahead as much as before. With Nia by his side, he felt that his last years would not be filled with loneliness or regret. He often held her hand, his old fingers trembling, and whispered, "You are the blessing I never expected." Sometimes, when the town gathered for festivals or meetings, people would glance at them and nod with quiet respect. They no longer saw only the difference in their ages. They saw a bond that was deeper than appearances, a bond built on loyalty and compassion. Nia carried herself differently now. She spoke with calmness, walked with quiet confidence, and treated others with kindness. The young girls in town began to look up to her, not for her clothes or her home, but for the strength she carried in her heart. They said to one another, "If Nia can endure and still love, then we can be strong too." Her transformation surprised even herself. She had once thought marriage would give her safety, but instead, it gave her growth. She had once thought her role was to be the one cared for, but instead, she became the caregiver. She had once thought she was too young to understand life, but now, through patience and compassion, she carried wisdom far beyond her years. And so, as the days turned into months, Nia and Seko's home became filled not with laughter and noise, but with peace and quiet understanding. Their bond was not built on youth or passion, but on respect, kindness, and shared humanity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, Seko leaned back in his chair and sighed softly. Nia sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap. He turned his head toward her and said, "When I first brought you into this house, I thought I was giving you life. But now I see, it is you who has given life to me." Nia's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of gratitude. She had once entered his home filled with fear and doubt. But now she sat there as a woman respected, admired, and loved, not just by Seko but by the whole town. And though she knew challenges would come again, she also knew she had found her place in the world, not as a lost orphan, not as a helpless girl, but as a woman of strength, patience, and courage. As Seko's health declined, the days in their home grew quieter. The strong man who once carried the weight of his family and his wealth now grew weaker with each sunrise. His steps became slower, his voice softer, and his body more fragile. But through it all, Nia never left his side. She moved with gentle care, adjusting his pillows, feeding him when his hands shook, and sitting beside him even when sleep called her. In the final weeks, Seko spent most of his time in bed. The once powerful man was now a shadow of himself, but his eyes still held light whenever they rested on Nia. She had become his anchor, the reason he found peace in those fading days. When he coughed, she was there to steady him. When he could no longer rise, she lifted him. When words failed him, she understood his silence. At night, when the house was still, Nia often sat awake, holding his hand. She thought of how far her life had traveled, from being a lonely orphan with no family to this moment, caring for the man who had given her a home. Tears sometimes fell down her cheeks, but she wiped them away quickly. She wanted Seko to see only her strength, not her sadness. Seko, though weak, saw more than she realized. One evening, as the sun's light faded through the window, he squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. His eyes, filled with tears of gratitude, met hers. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Thank you, Nia. You gave me love when I had nothing left but years. You gave me life again." Her heart ached at his words. She bent closer, pressing her forehead to his, and whispered back, "You gave me a place in this world. You gave me a home. We gave each other life." They stayed like that for a long while, hand in hand, until his breathing calmed and sleep claimed him once more. The final day came quietly. The air was heavy and the house felt still, as if it knew what was about to happen. Nia sat by Seko's bed, his frail hand in hers. His breathing grew shallow, his eyes half closed. She leaned close, her voice calm but full of love. "I am here," she whispered. "You are not alone." Seko's lips curved into a faint smile. With his last breath, he whispered one final word, "Grateful." Then his chest fell still and his spirit left in peace. Nia felt her heart shatter. The man who had been her husband, her teacher, and her companion was gone. She rested her head on his chest, holding on to him one last time. Her tears came freely, not of regret, but of deep love and sorrow. Though her heart broke, she also felt a strange strength within her. She had walked with him to the very end, never turning away, never letting him face his final moment alone. The news of Seko's passing spread through the town. People gathered outside the house, whispering not with mockery as they once had, but with respect. They remembered how Nia had come into his life as a girl mocked for her choice, but they now saw her as a woman of honor. During the funeral, the town filled with people who came not only to honor Seko but also to recognize Nia's devotion. Neighbors spoke in hushed voices about her loyalty. Elders nodded at her with respect. Mothers told their daughters, "Look at Nia. That is what love and dignity look like." Though she was only 19 when she married Seko, she now stood with the strength of someone far older. She had faced loneliness, judgment, sacrifice, and sorrow, yet she carried herself with quiet pride. She had given Seko dignity in his last years, and in return she had gained wisdom and respect that no wealth could buy. After his burial, the house felt emptier than ever. Nights were the hardest. She would reach for the space where he once lay, only to find silence. Yet she did not let despair consume her. She rose each morning, carried herself into the market, and greeted people with the same kindness she had shown her husband. The town began to treat her as more than just Seko's young widow. They began to seek her advice, to ask for her help, to respect her voice in discussions. She had become more than a wife who had lost her husband. She had become a symbol of strength and patience. Nia's story spread beyond the town. Travelers spoke of the young woman who had married an older man not out of greed, but out of need, and who had turned her marriage into a bond of compassion. They told how she cared for him when others would have left, how she turned her sacrifice into love, and how she found dignity in her pain. Though she was young and widowed, Nia carried her future with steady hands. She no longer saw herself as the orphan with no family. She had built her own story, one that would live in the hearts of those who knew her. She often visited Seko's grave, sitting beside it in silence. She spoke to him softly, telling him of her days, her struggles, her small joys. She believed in her heart that he still listened. Life was not easy for her, but she no longer feared it. She had learned that love is not always about youth or passion. Sometimes, it is about patience, sacrifice, and the courage to stand beside someone even when the world does not understand. She had given Seko peace, and in return she had found her own strength. Years would pass and people would still tell her story. They would say, Nia lost her husband young, but she gained respect, wisdom, and a place in our hearts. And when children asked about her, mothers would say, she is the woman who taught us that true love is not measured by age or riches, but by the kindness we give. Nia knew her journey was far from over. She had lost a husband, but she had gained something greater. She had gained the power to live with dignity, to walk with courage, and to inspire others. Her tears would still fall, but her spirit would remain unbroken. And so, though the house felt empty, her life was not. She had filled it with meaning, with honor, with love that would never fade. She had walked through sorrow and come out stronger. Nia, though young and widowed, had found her place in the world. She had lost a husband but gained something eternal, the respect of her people, the wisdom of her journey, and a home in the hearts of many.